Washington, 4 o'clock in the morning, 30th of March, 1867. The lamps still burned in the State Department. A small group of men stood around the table where the treaty had just been signed, their faces drawn from exhaustion. Baron Edouard de Stuckel, the Russian minister to the United States, gathered his papers. Secretary of State William Seward shook his hand. Outside, the city remained dark. Inside, the map on the wall showed a new border. 586,000 square miles had changed hands in the middle of the night for $7.2 million in gold. Almost no one in America knew about it yet. The treaty would be delivered to the Senate later that morning. Seward believed he had secured a future no one else could see. But what future exactly remained unclear. The territory they had just negotiated was known to most Americans, if it was known at all, as Russian America. It sat at the far northwestern edge of the continent, separated from the rest of the United States by British-held Canada. Its coastline stretched more than 33,000 miles. Its interior was largely unmapped. Fewer than 40,000 people lived there, most of them indigenous. The Russian-American company had operated there for decades, trading in furs, but by the mid-19th century, the enterprise was failing. Sea otters, once abundant, had been hunted nearly to extinction. Russian settlements clung to the coast and river mouths, thinly staffed and poorly supplied. The costs of maintaining the colony far exceeded any returns. Russia had reasons beyond economics for wanting to sell. The Crimean War, fought between 1853 and 1856, had drained the imperial treasury and exposed the vulnerability of distant Russian holdings. British forces had attacked Russian positions in the Pacific during that conflict, and the threat of further British expansion in North America loomed large. If war came again, Russia feared it could not defend Alaska. Better, then, to sell it to a nation that might serve as a buffer against British ambitions. Informal discussions about a possible sale had begun as early as 1859, but the outbreak of the American Civil War halted those conversations. When the war ended in 1865, Russia renewed its offer. Stuckel, who had served in Washington since 1854, was instructed to open negotiations with the American government. He found a receptive audience in William Seward. Seward had long believed in the expansion of American territory and influence. He saw the acquisition of Alaska as part of a broader vision, one that would extend American power across the Pacific and secure access to Asian markets. He also believed the purchase would strengthen ties with Russia, which had supported the Union during the Civil War, and weaken Britain's position in the region. The negotiations moved slowly. Stuckel and Seward exchanged proposals throughout 1866 and into the early months of 1867. They discussed borders, the rights of Russian citizens who chose to remain in Alaska, the withdrawal of Russian troops, and the price. Russia initially sought more than $10 million. Seward countered with $5 million. By late March 1867, they had settled on $7.2 million, which is equivalent to approximately 2 cents per acre. On the evening of 29th March, Stuckel appeared at Seward's home with word that Tsar Alexander II had approved the terms. Seward did not hesitate. He summoned his staff and Stuckel's and convened an emergency session at the State Department beginning at midnight. For 4 hours, they worked through the final language of the treaty. At 4 in the morning, they signed it. Seward delivered the treaty to the Senate later that day, hoping for swift ratification. The Senate was scheduled to adjourn at noon, and he wanted approval before the session ended. The Senate declined to act so quickly, and instead called a special session for April to consider the matter. The debate that followed revealed deep divisions. Some senators saw the purchase as a bold step toward fulfilling the nation's continental destiny. Others viewed it as a reckless waste of money on a frozen wasteland. And the press was no kinder. Newspapers mocked the acquisition, calling it Seward's Folly, Seward's Icebox, and Walrussia. Critics argued that the territory was too remote, too cold, and too worthless to justify the expense. One congressman compared the purchase to buying icebergs. Despite the ridicule, the Senate ratified the treaty on 9th April 1867 by a vote of 27 to 12, just 3 votes more than the 2/3 majority required. Tsar Alexander ratified the treaty on 3rd May. The exchange of ratifications took place on 20th of June in Washington. Under the terms of the treaty, the United States was required to pay Russia within 10 months of ratification. The actual payment took longer. The House of Representatives, which controlled appropriations, delayed approving the funds. Some members resented not having been consulted before the treaty was signed. Others questioned whether Alaska was worth the price. It was not until July 1868, more than a year after the treaty was signed, that the House voted to appropriate the money. On 1st August 1868, the United States Treasury issued a check for $7.2 million to the Russian government. The formal transfer of the territory took place on 18th October 1867 in Sitka, the administrative center of Russian America. Russian soldiers lowered their flag. American soldiers raised theirs. A small crowd watched. The event was brief and unremarkable. The United States now controlled a vast expanse of land that few of its citizens had ever seen, and fewer still understood. For years after the purchase, Alaska remained what its critics had claimed it was, a distant, neglected territory with little apparent value. The federal government struggled to establish any coherent system of governance. Initially, the Army was given responsibility for administering the region. And when the Army withdrew in 1877, the Navy took over. When the Navy left in 1879, there was no government presence at all for several years. The indigenous populations, who had lived in Alaska for thousands of years, faced displacement and disease. The few American settlers who arrived found little infrastructure and less support. Alaska existed on the margins of American consciousness, a forgotten acquisition. But the territory held something that no one had fully grasped in 1867. Its waters teemed with salmon, halibut, and cod. Its forests stretched for thousands of miles. And beneath its surface lay resources that would, in time, reshape the calculation of its worth. On 16th August 1896, gold was discovered along the Klondike River in the Yukon Territory of Canada, near the Alaskan border. News of the discovery reached the outside world the following summer, and by July 1897, ships carrying prospectors began arriving in Seattle and San Francisco. An estimated 100,000 people set out for the Klondike between 1896 and 1899. Most traveled through Alaska, passing through Skagway and Dyea before crossing the mountain passes into Canadian territory. Towns sprang up overnight. Fortunes were made and lost. The gold rush brought attention, investment, and infrastructure to a region that had been largely ignored. The Klondike discovery was not the only gold strike. In 1888, gold was found near Nome on the western coast of Alaska. In 1902, prospectors found gold in Fairbanks. Each discovery brought more people, more development, and more recognition of Alaska's economic potential. The fishing industry expanded rapidly. Canneries opened along the coast. By the early 20th century, Alaska was producing millions of cases of canned salmon each year, making it one of the most productive fishing regions in the world. Yet, even as Alaska's economic value became apparent, its strategic importance remained underestimated. That changed on 3rd of June 1942, when Japanese forces bombed Dutch Harbor in the Aleutian Islands. The attack was part of a larger operation that included the invasion and occupation of the islands of Attu and Kiska, marking the first time since the War of 1812 that foreign forces had occupied American territory. The Japanese reasoned that control of the Aleutians would prevent a possible alliance between American and Soviet forces and block any future attack on Japan via the Northern Pacific. American military leaders recognized the threat. General Simon Bolivar Buckner, Jr., commander of the Alaska Defense Command, warned that Japanese air bases in the Aleutians could bring cities like Anchorage, Seattle, and San Francisco within bomber range. The Aleutian campaign lasted from June 1942 to August 1943. American forces mounted a counteroffensive to retake the occupied islands. The campaign was brutal, fought in harsh weather and difficult terrain. When American troops landed on Attu in May 1943, they faced entrenched Japanese positions. The battle lasted nearly 3 weeks and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. When American forces landed on Kiska in August 1943, they found the island abandoned. The Japanese had evacuated under cover of fog. The campaign demonstrated what military strategists would repeat in various forms over the following decades. Alaska's location gave it control over critical Pacific transportation routes. In 1935, General Billy Mitchell had told Congress that he believed Alaska was the most important strategic place in the world, and that, in the future, whoever holds Alaska will hold the world. World War II transformed Alaska. Military installations expanded across the territory. The Alcan Highway was constructed, connecting Alaska to the contiguous United States by land for the first time. Thousands of service members were stationed there. After the war, the Cold War reinforced Alaska's military significance. Its proximity to the Soviet Union made it a key location for early warning radar systems and air defense. The state became home to major air bases and eventually ground-based missile interceptors. In 1968, nearly a century after the purchase, oil was discovered at Prudhoe Bay on Alaska's North Slope. Initial estimates suggested the field contained 10 billion barrels of recoverable oil, making it the largest oil field ever discovered in North America. By the time production began in 1977, following the completion of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, the field's value had exceeded any calculation made in 1867 by orders of magnitude. Over the following decades, Prudhoe Bay produced more than 13 billion barrels of oil. The revenues from oil extraction transformed Alaska's economy and provided billions of dollars to the state and federal governments. The resources that Seward and his contemporaries could not have anticipated continued to accumulate. Alaska's fisheries account for more than 50% of the fish caught in United States coastal waters. Its forests, though diminished by logging, still cover vast areas. Its minerals include copper, zinc, lead, silver, and gold. Its natural gas reserves remain largely untapped. And its location, dismissed in 1867 as remote and irrelevant, has become increasingly valuable in an era when the Arctic is opening to navigation and competition among nations for influence in the Pacific has intensified. Modern geopolitical analysts describe Alaska as a gateway to both the Arctic and the Asia-Pacific region. The Aleutian Islands form a natural barrier that could control access to the Arctic in the event of conflict. Great circle shipping routes between Asia and North America pass near Alaska's southern coast. Military planners note that Alaska's position allows for the projection of power across the northern Pacific and provides a shorter route to the western Pacific than routes through Hawaii. The state hosts critical infrastructure for missile defense, radar systems, and strategic bombers. It is, in effect, what Seward believed it could be, a fulcrum of American power in the Pacific. Yet the story of the Alaska Purchase is not a story of foresight rewarded. It is a story of contingency, of value that emerged from circumstances no one in 1867 could have predicted. Seward argued for the purchase on strategic and commercial grounds, but he did not foresee the Klondike Gold Rush, the Aleutian Campaign, the Cold War, or Prudhoe Bay. He saw Alaska as a stepping stone to further expansion, possibly into British Columbia or even Asia. He saw it as a place to establish coaling stations for ships crossing the Pacific. He saw it as a source of fish and furs. He was not wrong about those things, but they were not the things that ultimately mattered most. The debate over the purchase in 1867 centered on whether $7.2 million was a reasonable price for a territory that appeared to offer little immediate benefit. Critics called it extravagance. Supporters called it vision. Both were operating with incomplete information. The question was not whether Alaska had value, but what kind of value it had and when that value would become apparent. The answer took decades to emerge, and when it did, it came in forms that no one in that room at 4 a.m. on 30 March 1867 could have imagined. Consider the trajectory of other territorial acquisitions. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the size of the United States and secured control of the Mississippi River, but its full value only became clear with westward expansion and the agricultural development of the Great Plains. The purchase of Florida from Spain in 1819 resolved border disputes and removed a potential threat, but its economic and strategic importance grew over time. The annexation of Texas and the acquisition of the Southwest following the Mexican-American War opened vast new territories, but the discovery of oil in those regions came much later. Each acquisition involved a calculation based on limited knowledge, and each was justified or condemned by later generations based on outcomes that were not foreseeable at the time. Alaska fits that pattern, but with an unusual feature. The gap between acquisition and recognition of value was longer and the scale of misjudgment greater. For 30 years after the purchase, Alaska was widely regarded as a mistake. The Klondike Gold Rush changed that perception, but even then, the gold was mostly in Canadian territory. The real wealth of Alaska, its oil and its strategic position, did not become fully evident until the mid-20th century, 80 years after the purchase. By that time, the original critics were long dead, and the purchase was retrospectively seen as a triumph of vision. There is something unsettling about this. History is often written as if the outcomes were inevitable, as if the people who made decisions knew more than they did. Seward is remembered as a visionary who saw Alaska's potential when others did not. But the evidence suggests he saw some things clearly and others not at all. He was fortunate that the things he did not see turned out to be valuable. The purchase succeeded not because of superior insight, but because the territory happened to contain resources and occupy a location that became important for reasons Seward could not have anticipated. This raises questions about how we evaluate decisions made under uncertainty. If the value of Alaska had never materialized, if the gold rushes had not happened, if the strategic importance had remained theoretical, if the oil had not been there, would the purchase still be considered wise, or would it be remembered as Seward's Folly, a cautionary tale about overreach? The answer depends on whether we judge decisions by their outcomes or by the quality of reasoning at the time they were made. Most historical judgments favor outcomes. We remember the Louisiana Purchase as a masterstroke because of what happened afterward, not because Thomas Jefferson had perfect information when he made the decision. The Alaska Purchase reminds us that territorial acquisitions are bets on an unknowable future. They are justified by arguments about strategic position, economic potential, and national destiny, but those arguments are always incomplete. The true value of a territory depends on factors that emerge over time, shaped by technological change, geopolitical shifts, and discoveries that cannot be predicted. Seward's argument for Alaska was based on control of Pacific trade routes and access to Asian markets. Those things did become important, but not in the way he imagined. The Panama Canal, completed in 1914, provided a more direct route to Asia than anything Alaska offered. The real importance of Alaska came from resources Seward did not know existed and strategic challenges he did not foresee. Return now to that room in the State Department at 4 o'clock in the morning. Stuckel and Seward shook hands. The treaty was signed. The lamps would soon be extinguished. The men would go home. The Senate would debate. The press would mock. The House would delay payment. The territory would be transferred. And then, for years, almost nothing would happen. Alaska would remain what it had been under Russian rule, a distant place that few people thought about and fewer still understood. The $7.2 million would seem, to many, like money wasted. But beneath the surface, invisible to everyone in that room, the future was already there, waiting. Gold in the rivers, oil beneath the permafrost, a strategic position that would matter in wars not yet fought, resources that would power an economy not yet built. The men who signed the treaty that night believed they were making history. They were, but not in the way they thought. They were placing a bet on a future they could not see. And the future, when it arrived, was stranger and more valuable than any of them imagined. What remains, after all the retrospective justifications and celebrations, is the original question from that early morning in March 1867. Was it worth it? The answer seems obvious now, but in that room, at that moment, no one knew. They could not have known. They signed the treaty anyway, in lamplight, while the city slept, and sent it into a future that would decide for them.